These raviolis are one of the hottest things in New York right now, made famous by the newly opened Cafe Chelsea in the Chelsea Hotel. And this French recipe dates back to the Middle Ages. Yes, the French make pasta too, but you don't have to travel to New York to taste it. We can make it here at home, but before we do, we must first make the fresh pasta, which starts yesterday. Now, we've made pasta on this show many times before, and I've explained to you that you do not need to start it the day before. However, in some cases, I like to do it, especially with an egg dough, just to allow that egg to have more time to hydrate and penetrate the flour. But again, even with the egg dough, you don't have to. Don't mind my finger. I just burnt it the other day. It's almost all better. First thing we need is about 258 grams of whole eggs, or about 5 large eggs. Now, I'm a few grams over because whole eggs are hard to measure exactly. So I'm just going to know that and compensate with maybe a touch more flour, or know that I may need to work a little bit more flour in. And then as far as flour goes, we're going to be using a 00 flour. Caputo is a good brand from Italy. 454 grams of the flour. And pour the flour in the center of the cutting board, and then use the container to pour well with deep walls. And then the two tools we're gonna need is a fork, and then later we're gonna transition to a bench scraper. First the fork, beat the egg. You can't do that right in the well. Find it easier to do it separately, then pour it straight into the hole. Then we're going to start to beat the egg, using the fork to slowly pull into the flour from the side walls, and start beating it and incorporating it into the flour. And as you work in that flour, the egg mixture is going to thicken and aerate. And once you've reached somewhat of a pancake batter consistency, and the flour is starting to hold the egg, then we can transition over to the bench scraper and start to fold in the walls of the flour into the mixture, cutting it with the bench scraper so all of that egg gets distributed throughout that flour, hydrating it and allowing it to form into a ball. Once you've gotten it to a place where the dough will hold to itself, then you can just start to knead it until it starts to really form into a ball. I'm gonna scrape off any of this excess flour on the board, because since I'm doing the dough by hand, it's speaking to me and it's telling me it doesn't need any more flour. Then you're gonna just start kneading, and you're basically gonna take your palm and you're gonna pull the far end of the dough closer to you and then push down and forward with force to seal that inside up. Then you're gonna rotate it and do the same thing. And what you end up doing is folding in and kneading in layers of air, as well as working gluten to create the texture and the lightness that you get from a fresh pasta. And as you knead it, the surface of the dough is going to smooth out. It's gonna go from craggly and slightly tearing in places to being nice and smooth and supple. And all we need to do is work that for about 5 minutes until the surface of dough reaches that smooth, supple state. And then what we can do is just work that into a ball. I can tell the dough is not sticky, but it's hydrated enough to sort of seal to itself. And the purpose of this rest is both to continue to hydrate this dough in a moist environment so that when we go to knead it again for a second time, it's even softer and easier to knead. Another reason we rest is because the two ways to develop gluten is to knead and also to rest. So to make our lives a little bit easier, we can combine those two, do a little bit of kneading, do a little bit of resting, and we still get the same great product in the end. I'm just gonna wrap it up tightly in plastic wrap so that that moisture in the dough can allow it to hydrate a little bit quicker. And we're gonna let it rest for 15 minutes and come back then and continue kneading for another 5 minutes. About 15 minutes later, the dough's a lot softer now. It's a little tacky now. I'm feeling it for its tackiness, for its hydration. It feels good, but it could end up being a little moist tomorrow, but we're just gonna play it by ear. Now I'm just gonna knead for another 5 minutes and just smooth out that dough even further, creating more gluten so that we can get a really beautiful texture to this pasta when we make it tomorrow. We are in New York right now during a ton of rain, so there is humidity in the air. So that may play a factor in how this dough ends up, but we don't really care because the act of cooking is adjusting, and that's what we try and learn on this channel. Now, say you felt that your dough was a tad bit dry in this moment, you take a little spray bottle and you just kind of hit it with a little bit of water and allow that dough to suck it up. And alternatively, if the dough is a little sticky, you would do the same dusting of the board with flour, kneading, allowing the dough to suck it up slowly. Now that ball is even softer, I can sort of see air bubbles starting to develop, little pockets of air in the dough, which is exactly what you want. That creates that like kind of lightness to the dough. Now we're going to wrap this again. We're gonna pop this into the refrigerator and we'll come back tomorrow and we're gonna make our little French raviolis. Now it's the next day and I've taken my dough out of the refrigerator because an egg dough needs time to sort of come back down to room temperature to make it easy to roll out. So we're gonna allow this thing to hang out for about 30 minutes or an hour while we prepare the filling for our ravioli. Now the first mention of this recipe dates back to 1228. The Middle Ages, back in the southern French region of Dauphinè. And they were these raviolis usually filled with like a meat or a root vegetable. And after years of the Chelsea Hotel being abandoned and under construction, the new Cafe Chelsea in the newly opened hotel introduced New Yorkers to these Ravioles Du Dauphinè. But not in its traditional thumb-sized raviolis, but in these singular sheets, a plaque of sorts, of Comte and creme fraiche filled raviolis. It looks Italian, but it tastes French. And it starts with creme fraiche, some herbs, usually parsley, but I like to do some chives and some fresh thyme, and then a beautiful aged Comte. It's important to get an aged Comte. It's gonna be way more flavorful. Comte has a lot of fat to begin with, but it's just gonna add that reminiscence of like a aged Parmigiano Reggiano in this pasta. So to this bowl, I'm gonna add about 8 ounces of the creme fraiche into this bowl. And creme fraiche has like a taste of a blend of cream cheese and yogurt. So it adds both that fatty creaminess and that acidity that is nice to balance it. Almost like a buttermilk. I'm gonna rubber band some chives so they can pretty easily chop them into a nice fine dice. Then just go through and chop those chives as finely as you can. And we're gonna make this batch of ravioli filling for about half of the dough. If you're going to make raviolis with the full amount of the dough that we made, you're gonna have to double this recipe. I'm gonna take some fresh thyme and just start pulling the leaves. Probably the most annoying kitchen task when you need a lot of thyme leaves. But we're just gonna go through and pull about 2 tablespoons worth of thyme leaves and then chop those up just to break those down a little bit more so that they can be incorporated into the creme fraiche, and any stems remaining will get processed. Then we're gonna take that Comte and grate that into the mixture. And I'm gonna go about 2-3 ounces at a time. Then I'm gonna season with salt and pepper and stir the mixture together to see the consistency. And when we're making a ravioli filling, you don't want it to be too wet going in. So what we're doing is adding enough Comte into this mixture to thicken it so that it doesn't just melt away when the raviolis cook. If you can dry out the creme fraiche, remove some of its moisture, that's ideal, but we're just going to cheat by adding enough cheese to thicken that mixture into a pipeable filling that's gonna hold in the ravioli. Once you've added enough cheese to thicken it, maybe 5-6 ounces, adjust the seasoning one more time and add salt if needed, and then get it into a piping bag and put it in the fridge until we're ready to use it. So now our dough has rested. It should be beautifully hydrated. Beautiful, it doesn't stick to the plastic. That's usually a good sign. Bounces back, but still soft. So it's gonna be able to ply around the ravioli mold. The reason we use an egg dough for stuffed pastas is it gives it a little bit more elasticity. So when we go to sort of stretch it around a filled pasta, this is gonna have the elasticity to allow that to happen. So first, I'm gonna cut the dough into half, wrap one of those halves up, prevent it from drying out, and then I'm gonna cut this dough in half. And let us just say we've got some beautiful air pockets. That's what you're sort of looking for. That's gonna create a very light dough. So we're gonna cut that in half so that we have 1/4 of the dough that we're going to work at a time. And again, wrap up that quarter piece as well. Then I'm just going to sort of shape it into a little square or rectangle and flatten it out just so it rolls out nicely in the pasta machine. Sort of like that. And then starting at 0 or the widest setting on your pasta machine, feed the pasta dough in, and as it stretches out, you're gonna see these beautiful little bubbles of air. That is a beautiful sign that you did a good job kneading. Then we're gonna slowly make our way up through the settings on the pasta machine. Next we go to setting 1. After that you roll it through setting 2, and you're gonna do that all the way until you get to the 7th setting. You can go even thinner, but I like to take it to the 7th setting on the Mercato pasta maker. Once it's rolled out and nice and thin, get it onto the board. Now the thing that makes this ravioli special is the way that it's served. Usually these raviolis are served in these very small shapes, but cut up into individual pieces, but they serve them in these 6x4 sheets. I believe the ones that they use are the same quantity, but bigger holes for the raviolis than this, but this is the one that got delivered to me, so we'll make them a little bit smaller. And the idea is simple. We're going to take the ravioli stamp and we're gonna place it on top. And what you want to do is give a little bit of slack so we can get a nice bit of filling in each little ravioli. So just sort of drape the pasta sheet over the stamp and using your fingers gently press down into the mold, making sure that your nail doesn't cut the pasta sheet. Then we can snip off a small hole of the piping bag, and then before filling each hole, I'm just gonna give it one more last press to make sure that sheet is pushed against the walls of the ravioli stamp. Then you just go through and fill up a nice dollop in each hole of the creme fraiche filling. Then once the raviolis are filled, we're gonna give it a little spritz with water and then fold over the rest of the pasta sheet so that we can close the raviolis. And the stamp comes with this little rolling pin. Usually you might roll over these pretty hard so that you can cut the ravioli, but since I want to keep this a full sheet, I'm just gonna gently roll it so that I push the air out and I can seal the dough together. Then I can cut off any of the excess, and then it should just fall out of the tray, which it doesn't, but that's definitely an accident I wanted to show you, right? We'll fix that problem in a second, but for now you can take a pasta cutter and trim the edges and then cut that in half so you have 2 6x4 sheets of these raviolis. And then hold them on a sheet tray with plenty of semolina flour. But it is probably a good general rule of thumb to hit each hole of the ravioli stamp with some flour just to make sure it doesn't stick going forward. And then we can repeat the whole process, getting the sheet of pasta over the stamp, filling each ravioli with the creme fraiche, sealing it, and then now the pasta should just slip right out of the ravioli stamp. You see that? Progress in 30 seconds. Go ahead, trim up the ravioli with that ridged pasta cutter, and then you're left with the 2 6x4 pasta sheets. You can then get onto the semolina to dry out a bit. So now we have these beautiful little sheets of miniature ravioli. I'm just gonna let them sit and sort of cure, just dry up a little bit, just so they don't kind of fall apart. And while they do, we can prepare the rest of the ingredients, which are all very simple. All we're gonna need is some more of that aged comté, a little bit of butter, and traditionally they use a wine called vin jaune, but it kind of has a similar flavor to sherry, which is something that I just feel like most people might stock in their house more commonly than vin jaune. So I think sherry works fine in this recipe at home. And while these raviolis continue to rest, we can get a pot of water on the stove boiling. Let that boil and then we're ready to cook. Now to that boiling water, add enough salt so that it tastes like seasoned broth and not seawater. Then get a pan on high heat next to it. To that pan, we're going to add the sherry first. Just a quick glug, nothing too crazy. Then allow that to reduce, and while it does, I have a moment to grate some of that comté. Once the sherry is getting bubbly and glazy and reduced, then we can drop the pasta into the water. Then into the pan, we can add 1 to 2 tablespoons of unsalted cold butter and swirl that butter into the pan until melted. Also making sure that the ravioli is moving and not sticking to the pan. Then lower the heat slightly and start to drizzle in a tiny bit of the pasta water at a time and watch that butter sauce turn a little more creamy. We're going to use the pasta water as needed. Now allow the pasta to float in the water, and once it does, allow it to cook for an additional 30 seconds. Then transfer into the pan to allow the sauce to marry with the pasta. And we're about to add cheese to this, so I want to make sure I have enough of the pasta water in the pan to melt the cheese into. Then slowly work in the cheese, basting the raviolis with the sauce to melt that cheese slowly and gently into the sauce and thicken it. Then it's ready to serve, but a trick I use while resetting cameras is to hold the pasta pan over the steam of the cooking water to keep it warm, which helps the sauce not tighten up between shots. Then we're ready to plate the pasta. And this is meant to be an appetizer at Cafe Chelsea, so I'm going to place it in a small plate, and once plated, follow that up with some more of that beautiful sauce. Then the pasta is finished with some more cheese, a touch of fresh cracked black pepper, and then a drizzle of olive oil. And in a bite, you can do nothing else but give France their flowers for proving they can make a delicious pasta, and it's no surprise why New York City is losing it over this dish. In this one, with the addition of chive, you get a very much like a sour cream and onion flavor, almost pierogi-like. It's very good. Kudos to the French. If you want to give this recipe a try, the link's going to be down in the description. That's all that I have today. I'll see you next time. Until then, take care of yourself and go feed yourself.